Let me, if you don't mind, let me open us up with a word of prayer. Holy God, I just thank you for this time this morning. Thank you for these people who love their church, who love their presbytery, giving up a couple of days to come together for fellowship and worship and to do the business of the presbytery. And Father, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here with them these 2 days, to learn from them and to coach them and just to experience you with them. So we just ask a blessing on this entire meeting and also on this little clinic this morning. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so let me ramble for just a minute so you can get used to the accent. Because I ain't from here. My name is Scott Vaughan, and I'm going to sit some. My name is Scott Vaughan, and I am from Columbia, South Carolina. Grew up in North Georgia, north of Atlanta, about an hour north of Atlanta. Grew up in a small town. I'm the first generation that's not been a hog farmer. And when I was 15, I went to work for my hometown newspaper, and that led to I was writing sports, and that led to a 20-year career in newspapers. I was an editor, sold advertising, published a couple of weekly newspapers in small towns, so I understand small town. I understand smaller membership church, because that's what I grew up in. And so in 1991, had opportunity to move to Columbia, South Carolina to publish a little weekly newspaper there. Moved over and was there about a year and a half, and the Lord called me to vocational ministry. And I really believe in the call. I believe in the divine call on people to step out and into ministry. Now, maybe not vocationally, it may just be volunteering through your local church, but I believe in the call. And so I was called, and I didn't resist. I knew it was from the Lord, so I stepped right into it. I went to work for the South Carolina Baptist Convention, which is a 2,100 church denominational organization for Baptist churches in South Carolina. I was director of marketing for 8 years, and primarily, my job responsibility primarily was to lead a staff internally, but also to get out and travel around South Carolina and help and listen and coach local churches on how to be better communicators and how to communicate better internally, then also how to communicate better externally into the community about what God is doing within the church. And so I began to do that, and I did that until 2003, and then the Lord called again. And the Lord said, hey, I want you to step out from just being a Baptist, and I want you to serve all churches everywhere I send you. And so I left the Baptist Convention to start my consulting practice in 2003, and I left with a database of 300 churches, primarily Baptist, primarily Deep South. And the Lord has expanded my tent. Today I network with about 4,500 congregations in every state in the United States and every province of Canada. There's even a little mission outpost in the backwoods of Australia. And I have they communicate with me. Some mornings I wake up and I've just got an email from them. What should we do about this? And I get the feeling it's like Green Acres. They're climbing up a telephone pole to send me this email. But have never talked to them, but probably have had 100 email from them. And so I love coming out here. The Lord, it's funny, you would think that I would serve a lot of Baptists in the Deep South, but honestly that's not true, because nothing ever good came out of Nazareth. And so primarily I serve non-Baptists, and primarily outside the Deep South. I have the Lord has brought me to the Pacific Northwest every single year for the last 10 years to serve somebody. Including 4 straight years I taught at the Mennonite College in Abbotsford, British Columbia, and have led clinics, communication clinics for churches in the Seattle area and in the Portland area through the National Church Business Administration organization. And have served a couple of churches in the Seattle area as well. So I'm familiar with I-5. I've driven it in the rain, I've driven it in the snow, and I've driven it rarely in the sunshine. And so I'm familiar with you. And I'm also very familiar with Presbyterians because there was a time in my life, and I like to tell this, and I may tell this again, but I'll tell it to you. And when I was single, Vicki and I were dating, and my wife and I have been married 29 years. We have 4 boys. We had one every 3 years, whether we needed him or not. And they're 27 to 18. We're empty nesters, so we cheered. We took the youngest to college in August, and we actually came home and just had a celebration dance in the middle of it. But there were 2 years when I was single. I was working at the daily newspaper in Statesboro, Georgia. I was associate editor of that newspaper. And, I moved to Statesboro, Georgia, and I said, I've always gone to a Baptist church because that's how I've always been. But I'm going to visit every single church in this town, and then I'm going to decide where the Lord wants me to be. So I did. I visited every single church over the course of about 12 weeks, and I landed at this PCUSA church on the outside of smaller membership, PCUSA church on the outside of Statesboro, Georgia. Joined the church, was a member there for the entire time I lived in Statesboro. My mama wouldn't speak to me, but I loved those people. And you know why I chose them? I chose them because you walk in church as a guest and nobody pays any attention to you. But I walked in there that Sunday and I had 10 offers for lunch before I got back out in the parking lot. Those people loved all over me, and so I stayed with them. So I want to talk to you this morning about communication. I've put together a communication checklist that I want to kind of run through with you, and about 13 different points. But before we jump really into it, I want to begin with this. With whom do you want to have a relationship? Because I got to tell you, if you want to have a relationship with people, you have to invest in the communication. You have to invest in communication, because I'll tell you, if you kill the communication, you'll kill the relationship. Anybody in your life you don't want to have a relationship with, just stop talking to them. It'll die. My youngest son was dating this little girl his junior year in high school, and so summer came, and I said, okay, what's the plan to stay communicating over the summer with Hillary? And he said, I don't know, she'll do her thing, go on vacation, I'll do my thing. I said, son, if you don't keep the communication going over the summer with this little girl, you won't have a girlfriend when school starts back. So he just kind of piddled around, didn't really work it. School started, he came home that first day of school, and I said, so how's the relationship? And he said, she's dating Sean. And I said, see, I'm telling you, you kill the communication, you kill the relationship. So what I ask church leaders and also denominational leaders, who do you want to have a relationship with? And if you want to have a relationship with them, you better be communicating with them, and you better see this as an investment, not as an expense. Because you're investing in a relationship through communication. For this presentation, I understand all people are different and all churches are different. And so as I talk about these points, I'm going to be talking in generalities. I'm going to be talking in big generalities, and it will be up to you, and I'll be around this meeting if you want to talk privately. That's cool, we can do that. It'll be up to you to take this and massage it to your local community and your local congregation. And some of the things you hear me talk about, you'll say, wow, I think we can go back and do that. And some of the things you hear me talk about, you'll say, I don't know, we can't do it the way he says to do it, but we can massage it to make it work for us. And then some of the things you hear me talk about, you'll say, wow, that's not us, and that may never be us, and we will put together, we might pull that back out of the toolbox and think about that in 3 or 4 years. So my goal for this is that you just take away 5 things that you can take back to your congregation and just talk about, discuss it, and see where it goes. And I want to tell you something. If you can take notes, I stopped doing handouts. If you would like to receive a copy of this presentation, I'll email it to you if you'll just make sure I get your email address. And that way you can share it with everybody you know within your church or however you want to share it. But I'll make it available to you. One of the things I want to say to you is Satan is in the numbers. And so anytime I hear from a lot of smaller member churches especially that get very caught up in the numbers. In fact, we like to measure success based on attendance. And I'm letting you off the hook. I'm just letting you off the hook. Don't ever measure success based on attendance. In North America, 80% of the churches average less than 80 on Sunday. So if you're a smaller member congregation, you're in the overwhelming majority of churches. It's just unfortunate that all we hear about are these giant, big mega churches. And so celebrate who you are, and celebrate the fact that you are doing what God has called you to do. I have taught communication clinics for 1,000 people, and I've taught communication clinics for 10 people. I flew all the way to Sacramento, California 4 years ago to teach a communication clinic for 10 people. And everybody said, oh, why did you do that? Why did you do that? It's such a long trip to go do it. And I said, well, first of all, I was called to do this. The Lord called me to go. The people there wanted me to come. It did not matter how many the Lord had there. I trusted that the Lord had who He needed to have there. And I'm going to tell you, I served those 10 people. They were from 5 different churches, and I still have a relationship with them today. So I'm just saying, here's the deal. If you are doing what God has called you to do, and you are communicating and promoting and investing in communication, you just trust for the Lord to send who He needs to send. Sometimes we forget we are not Coca-Cola. We are not McDonald's. We are a supernatural organization, and there are things within it we just absolutely can't explain, and we won't ever be able to explain this side of heaven. So you just do what God has called you to do, and trust the Lord to provide all that He needs to provide for you. All right, so this is going to be some very practical things for you to think about. And first off is this. I get a lot of calls from churches that say, Scott, can you look at our newsletter and give us some thoughts on our newsletter? Can you look at our website and give us some thoughts on our website? And I'll just tell you, sometimes, most of the time, it's easier to scrap everything you do and start all back over than try to fix here and there, fix here and there. Sometimes it's just better wipe the table clean and say, okay, who are we trying to reach? How do they want to receive communication from us? What message do they want to hear from us? And what's the timing of the delivery of that message? And so then you start to construct a new communication system. Some of the things you may want to keep, and some of the things you may want to throw out. And but sometimes it's easier just to scrap everything and just to reimagine what the communication system will look like. And I'll tell you, this is so key, folks. You can have the greatest website in North America, but if you don't have somebody who understands how to use a website, how to manage a website, how to write copy for a website, then it's never going to accomplish what you want it to accomplish. So communication management is essential to communication. And too many churches and too many organizations have dumped communication on an overworked, underpaid church secretary. And I'm telling you, communication is the most important thing you do. It is the most important ministry in your church. No sermon was ever preached without communication driving it. No class was ever taught. No mission trip was ever gone on. No discipleship effort ever happened. Communication drives every single thing we do as human beings. So this is an important business. In fact, I've said to church planners before, when I speak to church planners, I've said, if I were planning a church, I would have 2 staff members. One person to manage the money and one person to manage the communication. And every single thing we did outside of that would come as a volunteer out of the pew. That's how important communication is. It is a key fundamental management within the church. Every decision you make in communication should be driven by some kind of research. It can be big research projects, but it can just be small research projects. But I'll tell you, in the local church, I would constantly be asking people, how do you want to receive communication from us? How do you want to receive communication from us? And I would constantly be paying attention to attendance trends. I would constantly be paying attention to giving trends, because people will vote with their attendance and they will vote with their checkbook. And so I would pay attention to everything. Every conversation you have with anybody within your church is research. I would not act on a single opinion, but as I started to hear trends and see trends, I would have meaningful conversation about those, especially as it relates to communication. And I'll tell you, the best person to manage the research within your church is somebody who loves baseball stats. You got to love statistics. You got to love statistics to love research. And so I would just say, hey, who in here loves baseball? Who in here keeps a stat book? And see if you can find somebody who loves the research and also understands database. I'll tell you a little story. I teach a Sunday morning Bible study at my church. And I started tracking attendance. This class is 15 years old. And when we started, I started tracking attendance. I would track every individual, not a couple. I would track them by individual, see who's coming. And I would watch the trends of that. And then I started in the database, I started adding little fields like, okay, what was the weather on that Sunday? What sermon was the pastor preaching on that Sunday? Because when he talked about money, things started going south in a hurry. And so I started really watching these variables that occurred. And I got to a place now where if I wake up on a Sunday morning and it's pouring down rain, I can pretty much tell you within 1 or 2 people exactly who's going to be there on Sunday morning. So what I've gotten to do is I've got everybody in my phone. I got all the cell phones in my phone. So I wake up in the morning and it's raining and I just blast out a text message. Hey, I know it's raining. God's still at work. I've got to be there. You do too. And so to know, and it's also helpful to know, like if I see somebody and they've not been there for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, I will intentionally reach out and say, hey, I'm not trying to get in your business. I'm just making sure that you're not going through something we need to be praying about. So I watch that. Or if I see that a couple has been coming together and all of a sudden only one of them is coming, I want to know what's going on there. Not to be in their business, but just for the purpose of ministry. let me just tell you, you need to evaluate your church's reputation. Reputation, most churches don't have a great reputation. Most churches don't have a poor reputation. Most churches are absolutely invisible. We are just absolutely invisible to people, and we need to begin to evaluate our reputation within the community. Do people know? Churches will hire me to come and spend 2 or 3, usually a long weekend with them. And some communities will co-op together, and 4 or 5 churches will invite me to come. But one of the things I like to do is I go to the neighborhood Walmart or Target, and I'll just say, walk up to strange people, and I'll just say with a southern accent, hey, I'm looking for a church to attend this weekend. Do you you live here? Do you know anything about this church? Just see if they know anything about that church. And it's amazing what people will just vomit out to a total stranger. I mean, but overwhelmingly when I do that research, they just say, I don't know anything about them. I've never heard of them. And sometimes we get so internally focused, we just forget that there's this big community of people out there who are unchurched, dechurched people who really would love to be in a local congregation. They really would. We just aren't inviting them. We're not looking outside and inviting them. In my community, in the community where I grew up, there's an old-fashioned camp meeting every summer. And they have this, it's run by the Methodists, but it's kind of become this ecumenical thing. And they've got this big open-air arbor in the middle of this circle of cabins all the way around it. And everybody comes, and all these families occupy these cabins for a whole week, and they worship 3 times a day together in this open-air arbor. And it's so interesting because all the cabins face to the inside. All the cabins face to the arbor, and yet all around this camp meeting there are hundreds of homes full of people who are not in church anywhere, have no relationship with the Lord, and yet these people, these Christians, get together every summer, love on each other, and all face the inside of the circle. We need to be facing the outside of the circle. We need to be worried about the people around us and helping connect them to the Savior we claim to love. And so, evaluate your church's reputation. And what do you hear about your church? As your session, you need to have these conversations. I'm working now with the largest Presbyterian church in Columbia. I'm actually on a 6-month contract to help them redo their entire communication system. And I've spoken to their session at every meeting, and I've said, you ought to be spending 20 minutes of every meeting talking about how your church communicates. How does our church communicate, and what do we need to do as a membership, but also to support the staff toward being better communicators. And to say, all right, what is everybody hearing about our church? And what do we need to do about that? And how does the community see it? Folks, you need to have a website. I'm just telling you, and I'm going to tell you, size is no excuse. And I'll just make you this promise. My email is going to be on the last slide here. And if you absolutely, positively have no idea how to have a simple website for your church, I want you to email me and let me help you. I'll help you for nothing. Because I just believe every single church must have a website, even if it's just a 1-page website that says, here's when we meet and here's how to find us. Every church needs a web presence, and it needs to be simple. It really needs to be simple, and I want to talk for a minute about that. Beware the catalog in a postcard culture. When websites began to roll out, churches said, hey, we got to tell everybody every single thing about us. And so we ended up with these voluminous catalogs of information. I was working with a big Methodist church, Dunwoody United Methodist Church, north of Atlanta, and their website had bloated to 250 pages because they couldn't say no. Somebody, the co-ed softball team came and said, we need a page on the website. Okay. What are you going to use it for? We're going to put our schedule on there. Well, they put the first schedule on there, but then everybody forgot about it, and so the schedule was from 5 years ago. This co-ed softball team doesn't need its own page. It doesn't. So when we looked at the statistics of the number of pages that people were actually coming to, 10. How do we find you? How can you pray for us? I'm going to tell you, if you don't have a way on your website for people to contact you and request prayer, horrible mistake. If for no other reason, I ought to be able to go to your website and send you a prayer request, and then you respond to that and tell me how you're praying for me. If you're ever on Family Feud, number 1 page, staff page. And they want to see your photographs. And if you're not photogenic, that's what Photoshop is for. Because let me tell you, I've had to coach some people through some awful photographs. There was this church in North Carolina, and the pastor, no kidding, the pastor had a photograph on there. He was wearing a 3-piece suit, red Bible, with all these books for looks behind him. You know, nobody's read all those books. Books for looks. Impress the marriage counselor. And so he's standing there like Napoleon. And so they said, can we send you a DVD about our church? And I said, yeah. So they sent me this DVD. And I put it in my computer, and I was watching it, and the pastor was on there talking about the church, and he was hilarious, and he was articulate, and he was funny, and he was personable. And I thought, this is not the same guy. Nobody is coming to this church to see the guy on the website. Everybody would want to come hear this guy preach. So I had to coach him through that. And you know, the churches, the photographs need to sort of match. So don't have a photograph of somebody at the kid's birthday party, and then have another professional photograph of somebody else. Make sure they're all kind of the same. But we got to shrink these. We got to shrink these websites down to the pages that really people need. It's not what you want to tell them. It's what they need from you. Every ministry doesn't need its own page. Sorry. The men's ministry at my church is a group of 70-year-old men, gathers once a month to eat breakfast in the fellowship hall. They aren't inviting anybody to join them, and nobody is. They don't need a men's ministry page on the website, because God forbid we should have anybody stumble upon them. What do people want to know about us? What do people need from us? And how do we simply begin the conversation? Let me plant this idea with you. Your website is not to tell everything there is to know about you. Your website is to give people just enough information so they need to call you, or they need to email you, or they need to come see you. You see, if I go to your website and you're telling me every single thing there is to know about you, then I can make a decision about whether to intersect with you and never really give you a chance, and never talk to you, and never see you, and never come see you. So we want to tease people. It's like this. I'm telling you, my wife was an answered prayer. I got on my knees. I said, Lord, I'm tired of dating. Send her to me. I know you know who she is. And 2 weeks later, met her. First date, folks, I got to tell you, if she'd have known everything there was to know about me, there would have been no second date. And so you just want to give people enough so that they contact you, so that they come see you, and then you got to be ready for them. Talk a little bit about that.